Welcome everyone to Techstars headquarters, New York City. This is Gary Stewart. He is the managing director of Techstars New York City, also my former boss. And we're really grateful that he's given us this space on less than 24 hours notice. So can we have a thunderous round of applause for Gary? Okay. Gary's also a Yale alum. Twice. He is actually he was at school at the same time that Anne was, which is really cool. And Techstars, I'll just give you some more background, see how much I remember from when I was here. Techstars has over $100 billion in companies within its portfolio, which is of over 4,000 companies. And that includes over 20 unicorns. A unicorn, for those of you who don't know, is a company worth more than $1 billion. Some of those include companies like Uber. And that's also more unicorns than all of Europe combined. So.
That's not true.
No?
Yeah. More than London.
Okay. More than London,
yeah.
Okay. Well, that's how much I remember from working at. Anyway, Gary runs a pretty tight team. And what Techstars basically is it's an accelerator for early stage startups. So that means companies that are just getting off the ground in pre-seed. And I guess I'll let you take it from there. Tell us about Techstars.
First of all, thanks for allowing me to be here with you guys today. I always like to start by giving my 2-minute pitch. Can you guys in the back hear me? More or less? All right. I don't know if I can think of much more than that, but we'll try. So yeah, my story really quickly is born in Jamaica, grew up in the Bronx, went to Yale College. Ann and I are actually the same class, so class of 1996, but I was a gunner, so I actually kind of really focused as a good immigrant kid on all of my classes, so I graduated magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa. Then I went to Yale Law School, so I did Yale Law School for about 3 years. Also did well at Yale Law School. I was executive editor of the Law Journal, and then went to go clerk in DC for a year. Interviewed at the Supreme Court for a clerkship, but then decided I really wanted to go to Europe at that point. That was for a lot of personal reasons. I called that at the time my quarter-life crisis, because I was really good at school, but I wasn't really good at figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. So I ended up just going to Europe. I thought it was going to be for a year, working in a corporate law firm doing mergers and acquisitions and IPO work. I found that really boring. So then I thought, well, maybe if I change location, so I was in London at the time, maybe if I change location to Barcelona, that would make it more exciting. So I lived in Barcelona for about 10 years. Barcelona was exciting, but corporate law wasn't. So then I kind of eventually started a business. We raised a few $1 million for the business at the time, which was a lot in Spain in the early 2000s. And then eventually we exited the company, so we sold that company to a larger competitor. And then in about 2010, I went to go teach at a business school in Madrid called IE Business School. So I started teaching entrepreneurship there. Then a very large telecommunications company in Europe basically reached out to me and said they wanted to set up an early stage vehicle to invest in startups. So we invested in about like 180 companies. I was in charge of the UK, well first Spain and then the UK, which I moved to in about 2014. And then I ran that. When I left that, the portfolio was worth about $2 billion almost. And then I moved back to the US to kind of then teach at Yale Law School, where I teach now. I teach entrepreneurship as a guest lecturer, as a lecturer at the law school. And now I'm running Techstars. And as Seth said, Techstars, the world's largest pre-seed investor. So we're not like an accelerator, like let's say Tsai CITY accelerator. Like we invest capital in the company. So each company we invest about $120,000 in. Usually that means that we get about 6 to 8% of the company's equity. So we're co-owners of the business. We have a portfolio now of more than about 3,500 companies. And as Seth said, 20 of those companies are unicorns, and about 100 of those companies are worth more than $100 million. So that's a bit about Techstars and about me.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for letting us have this incredible space on such short notice. We all came from, so actually guys, Gary was going to speak tomorrow morning to you in New Haven at Yale, and we were able to make this work, so he's speaking a day early. So this is a talk you would have heard anyway, but now you're getting to hear it in a pretty cool location. in the big city. So I guess let's start with some of the things I noticed when I was working here with you, which is that you've spoken to the importance of having your friends and family brought into your entrepreneurial journey, which can be really difficult. Can you talk more about how you've done that, or how you recommend other people can do that?
Yeah, so I think it's been a journey kind of, Anne mentioned it as well in her talk, like now people think about entrepreneurship as something cool, but in the early 2000s people didn't think as entrepreneurs as cool, they thought of them as unemployed. So the idea that you would kind of like have 2 Yale degrees, working in a law firm, and then leave it to start your own business, people thought I was crazy, right? And it's not just like, especially again being an immigrant kid, it's not just like your friends, it's also your family. They're like, what are you doing? Why do you spend all that money on education to then throw it away and do this like startup thing, right? So I think like now that's changed a little bit, but not that much. And then I think the other thing is that like being an entrepreneur, as Anne said as well, like if you knew all of the difficulties of being an entrepreneur, sometimes you're like, why would I do this? Like I could have a much easier life doing something else. And the fact that you've made that decision doesn't mean that your loved ones also have made that decision as well, right? So having a very nice, stable income is like the American dream in a lot of senses, right? Like the idea that from month to month you may not be certain of how much money is coming in is not something that everyone is willing to deal with, and that can kind of create friction in families, which is why I guess a lot of people tend to think of entrepreneurship as something that it's easier to do when you're a bit younger, even though the average age of entrepreneurs is usually the mid-30s. But the idea is better to do it, if at all, before you have like a lot of connections, when you still have like the possibility of making mistakes and then recovering from them, or like I did in my second company, getting someone else to fund it, right? So that was like the big lesson that I learned as well. Things also change dramatically when you have investors investing in your company, so you can have that safety net coming from private capital that believe in your idea rather than you're risking everything yourself.
So actually on that subject, can you talk a little bit about what the difference might be for students who don't have as much background in what it's like to start a company? The difference between trying to bootstrap a startup using like grants from an organization like Tsai CITY, or to actually raise some amount of venture capital from angel investors or from a venture capital firm, and what that might look like.
Yes, I think the first thing to remember is that raising venture capital funding is like really difficult. It's like going to Yale, right? So bootstrapping versus getting venture backed is like maybe the difference between going to college and going to Yale. There's only a very small percentage of people that create companies that are ever going to get venture backed, and those companies are the folks that investors believe are going to provide them with the biggest possible return. So, there's one guy, I'm bringing him to my class, Mitch Kapoor. He graduated class of 71. He invested, I think it was $75,000 in Uber, and got back like $300 million, right? Those are kind of nice investment odds, and those are the sorts of odds that kind of venture capitalists are looking for. So they're not looking for good businesses, interesting businesses. They're looking for blockbuster businesses. So it's like, we have the US Open right now. You're not looking for someone who plays tennis. You're not even looking for someone who can get into the US Open. You're looking for the next Serena Williams, the next Roger Federer, the next Carlos Alcaraz, right? And so you have to prove all the time that you have the possibility to be that greatest of all time, or what we use in the kind of space here is the category winner, right? The category winner is the Facebook, it's the Google, it's the one that owns the entire industry and therefore has like some sort of like monopolistic almost benefits of owning that category. That's how they become billion-dollar businesses, right? Everyone else, they competed nicely, but they're the ones that you don't remember about at the Olympics. They're the ones that competed, but kind of who cares, right? Like I hope they had fun, but in terms of an investor, like the investor's really looking for the gold medalist.
And so what you're saying is basically, like, as a venture capital firm, what you're looking for is
the winner. It's pure speculation. Like literally all venture capital is making a bet on who's going to be the winner in an exciting industry. So when Anne says, for example, AI and large language models are going to be the future, what people are doing now is they're saying, okay, that's going to make a lot of money for a lot of people. Who do we think are going to be the winners in this space? Because if we bet on the winners, we get really, really rich. We can put in $100,000, and that $100,000 can become $100 million. And that's the sort of investment that venture capital is about. So think about venture capital as placing bets on people that you think to be winners in very large industries that is still not really defined yet. There's no clear winner in the industry. The industry is just starting or at a moment of inflection, and you're betting on the winner. And so your job as a startup is to convince the investors that you are that likely winner. And here are the reasons why.
A really great example of that actually is in the most recent Techstars batch, there was a company that was using large language models to create educational content or like entertainment for children. So generative video basically. And that's a very, it's a space that's very saturated at this point. But one of the things that when I was talking to them I found really fascinating was that they had all of these very strong moats that were in the form of partnerships, not necessarily tech. And that's probably something you were looking at when you decided to invest in them. Can you talk a little bit more about what are those qualities that you look for in a company and people when you choose to invest in them? Because for context, guys, Techstars is very competitive. These batches are 10 to 12 people out of 2,000 applicants. So it's incredibly difficult to get into one of these accelerators. What do you look for when you're trying to pick those companies?
Speak up, please. Is that for both of us?
Yeah. I mean, just go for it.
Yeah, no, we'll try, but I mean, there's a limit to what I can do. So if you can't hear me, like, please just like raise your hand in the background, and I can try a little bit louder, but that's about kind of it. So I think like in terms then of what you're looking for as an investor, I think the first thing is the founder attacking a very large industry, right? And I think this is something I didn't really take fully into account. Companies will tell you this is the product that I'm selling, but they won't tell you why it's a product that's going to be a game changer for a very large industry, right? It could be something that they're very passionate about, but again, from the investor lens, you're not really interested in what people are passionate about. You're interested in what's going to make a lot of money in the next 5 to 10 years. And you're making a bet that the industry is going to be a large industry and that this person's proposition within that industry is going to be game defining, right? They're going to kind of own the category within that large industry. So I think the first thing is really to understand how big is the market. And I think a lot of founders don't think about that, right? Like if you say to me, my job is to set up another restaurant, that's really great. I'm not really sure how much money we're going to be able to make from that. It could be really great for you and your family. Maybe you'll become millionaires and all of that, but that's not a venture-backable business. So the first thing you're really trying to figure out is this a venture-backable business? And a venture-backable business means it's a business that we can see the pathway to making about $100 million in revenue within the next like 5 years, right? If there's no pathway to $100 million in revenue in 5 years, it probably is very difficult that you're going to see that as venture-backable. So that's the first thing. Is it a large industry where there's a lot of money at play and the winner is going to get a huge chunk of that money? I think the second thing is who else is doing it and why is this something that is better and defensible, right? Because a lot of people kind of pitch you a product. They say, hey, you know, like I just got to Yale, it's really lonely, so I'm going to create a social network. And it's like, yeah, probably is a really good idea, but someone already did that. So can you tell us a bit more about why you think you're going to beat that incumbent? What is it about this is going to kind of get people to switch from what they're using now to you, right? So I think like that would be the second thing that we look like. Is there an insight there that really helps us to understand why users or customers are going to go from the existing solutions that are substitutes to this particular company? I think the third thing would be traction. Is there any evidence? I always say the difference between like a vision and a delusion is that other people can see it, right? So are other people validating this idea that you have in your head, or are you the only person that can see it? As long as you're the only person that can see it, probably not that many people are going to take a risk on it. When other people start to see it and get excited about it, that's when it starts to become a bit more exciting. And then I think probably lastly, the team. Are these folks that you actually want to spend the next 5 to 10 years with? Like, there are a lot of times where you can kind of see a company and the idea sounds great, but you're like the most painful thing in the world would be to have to spend more time with this person, and you're probably going to have to pass on the investment unless it's the next Mark Zuckerberg. That could be the only kind of thing. But even in that case, it's because he had monster traction, right? He had really like monster user growth, so people could overlook some of the other factors. If you don't have that monster user growth, then it becomes more important that I actually believe in your capacity to become this category winner, this gold medalist, this GOAT, whatever metaphor you want to use. You have to believe this person's going to be able to take it all the way to the gold medal.
So to summarize that, you would say the three things you look for are the size of the market opportunity, the amount of traction they have, and perhaps like who else is building in the space and what's differentiating them from that. And then thirdly, like the founders themselves,
Yeah.
are they technical? Are they like good people? Why are they doing this? Why do they care about this? That kind
Yeah, are they going to be the winners? Like, you know, I don't want to find people who play tennis. I want to find Serena Williams.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about, in other conversations we've had, you talked about how diverse organizations function better. And I'd argue that same logic applies to small teams. How have you optimized for your team to be as diverse as possible and maximize the value of all of those different perspectives?
Yeah, so I mean, our program is part of the JP Morgan program, and so JP Morgan has a very clear focus on making sure that the teams are representative, that they look like New York is the way we like to say it. I think like what that means though in practice is simply that we make sure that every community knows that we exist. So the same way that you can kind of, if we were talking about Techstars and there are a whole bunch of Yale entrepreneurs, but we never spoke to Yale entrepreneurs, maybe a good chunk of you wouldn't know that we existed, how we work, how we invest, all of those sorts of things. The same thing operates for other communities. So I think a big part of the job is making sure that we're speaking to lots of different communities and making sure that people know that we exist and that we're also welcoming to them. Like if you want to use our space for an event, it's not only for Yaleys, we do lots of events throughout the year for LGBT communities, for Black, Latino, Asian communities, whatever the community is, like the space is open, it's an open ecosystem. So I think like part of the idea with diversity for me is not that you have like quotas or targets or anything like that, but that you just make sure that people know that you're welcoming and that you're open to them. And then what's been really surprising, at least for some people, is that you then get like lots of really amazing projects coming in. If I look at this cohort of folks here, you see lots of women and lots of people of color and maybe other kind of underrepresented groups. And that's natural, I would think, right? That's just kind of the natural kind of allocation of talent in a community. And I think all we're trying to do is kind of make sure that we let everyone know that we're open to them. Yeah. And I think that a lot of really great companies are also solving problems in their communities that maybe other people can't see. So maybe the fact that, like, you know, when Anne was telling her experience, it was very much about the fact that, you know, she went through very particular experiences that led her to create this company that maybe allowed her to see insights that other folks wouldn't have been able to see. I think the same is true for diverse entrepreneurs as well. Sometimes folks are seeing community needs that maybe other communities can't see, but those can also be billion-dollar businesses. So I think like one example I'm using in my class right now is perhaps no one would have thought that Barbie as a movie would be worth $1 billion, but you know what? What's her name? Gerwig?
Greta Gerwig.
Yeah, saw it. You know, Margot Robbie saw it. There were other folks that saw it, and now all of a sudden that's $1 billion, more than $1 billion property that maybe other folks would have said, who would really watch a movie about Barbie? Well, I guess like there are enough women out there and other folks that kind of are allies that said, we want to see it, and that's how you make a lot of money, by serving needs of undermet communities that maybe other folks can't see.
My sister really likes the other Barbie movies too, the animated ones. Yeah, I mean, on the subject of trying to reach as many people as possible, Techstars, guys, also hosts a lot of events that are not just for their community here that are part of Techstars, but for the greater New York City and East Coast entrepreneurial ecosystem. So, for example, this summer, you hosted this huge summer jam that was intended to bring together all these venture capitalists and founders from across New York City. Can you talk a little bit about how Yale students can get involved in this ecosystem beyond Yale?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, okay, so there are different ways to answer the question. I mean, I think the first thing is that like as you graduate from college and go into the real world, like part of what you see is that a lot of opportunity is tied to access, right? So if you don't know about an opportunity, or if, you know, like even a job, a lot of jobs are really not going to be posted on job boards. I think it's something like 70 to 75% of all jobs are given to people that are known by the person that's kind of giving the job, right? People like to go with safe bets, and the safest bet is someone within your network or someone that's a friend of a friend, right? So that's just kind of like a given, and I've seen this like everywhere I've been in the world, and it's probably more so the case outside the US, I would say, even than in the US, but a lot of it really is just like who you know. I think the great thing about Yale is that like there are a lot of really interesting people who are Yale alums. So, you know, for my class, for example, I'm inviting, even though I'm not like of the same political party, Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Like he went to Yale as well. I reached out to him and said, hey, would you come and do a guest lecture at my class? Stacey Abrams will come. Like I said, Mitch Kapoor is coming, Steve Blank. So you can reach out to lots of people just because you have this like one connection, which is the Yale connection, and then leverage that as much as you want. One of the things that we talk to the startups a lot at Techstars about is there's a guy named John Hill. He used to work at LinkedIn. So he was the one that helped LinkedIn to come up with their company pages and their educational institution pages, right? And what LinkedIn found, and this has also been confirmed in like Harvard Business Review independently, is that if you went to the same school as someone and you sent them an email, they're 40% more likely to answer the email or respond. I can't remember what's the action, but the point is that it gives you an advantage, right? If you worked at the same job as someone, if you say, oh, we're both ex-Googlers, the person is more likely to answer the email than not. So kind of finding points of commonality with other folks, belonging to networks that are well established, I would say. Those are all things that are really useful in terms of giving you a potentially unfair advantage in your career, right? And I think like Yale is definitely one of those institutions that gives you a very unfair advantage. Even when I traveled to Europe, people didn't know anything about me. They could say this is a black kid, or this kid, or that kid, whatever. They just saw Yale on my CV and it opened up a lot of doors because that validation was what mattered. When I got the job at the business school in Madrid because a guy who was in TD, Timothy Dwight, who wasn't even my year, we weren't friends, but we were both in Madrid at the same time, he said to me, hey, why don't you come teach at this business school? I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. That's how I got the job at the business school. I didn't really interview for it. They didn't publicize that the job was open. It was just kind of like, that was how it worked. So I think like the key to the whole thing is, and Anne said this as well, is like really just focusing on people, developing relationships, and leveraging the Yale network and other networks that you may have to open doors for you.
Yeah, and you've worked, speaking of Madrid and so on, you've worked in a lot of different, vastly different environments, from New York City to London and Madrid, all fantastic cities.
And Barcelona, that was fun.
How has the culture in each of these places impacted your entrepreneurial journey? And how have you noticed your habits change with each location? Like, what insights do you think you've gained as a result of having worked in so many different places, and how are things different compared to the US?
So like I said, I think I was a bit of a gunner, like intense, when I was in like college and law school. So when I went to Spain, what I liked about it was just so relaxed. It was like no one there was intense, and they kept saying to me, you Americans, you live to work and we work to live. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So the idea that you could just like relax and enjoy life and like, have a 2-hour lunch and hang out with your friends on the weekend, and the club starts at like 2:30 in the morning, you go till like 7. All of that was like eye-opening for me and just gave me like a lot of different perspective. Now, of course, the downside to that is like maybe their economy isn't as strong as you would like it to be. So you kind of realize that there are like pluses and minuses to everything, but at least in my early 20s, that was really cool to just have that experience of like not having the stress and the pressure of everyone else's expectations or even of my expectations. So that was that. And they were also like very family oriented, which I also really liked. I think like in Madrid, more of the same. And I think in London, there I got to like hang out with like the royal family. So I got to, because you start to realize on the one hand that entrepreneurship is something that every country in the world is trying to figure out how to solve. So that's from like China to Spain. So that's how I met the King of Spain, because they were trying to figure out how to build like their entrepreneurial ecosystem. That's how I got the job at a large corporation. That's how I met like the royal family in the UK, because everyone finds entrepreneurship to be the key to the economic motor of their countries, right? Like at the end of the day, you look at like the 10 richest people in the world, I think it's like 5 or 7 of them are tech entrepreneurs that created their companies in like the 90s, early 2000s. Like Elon Musk, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, Mark Zuckerberg, et cetera, right? So every other country in the world is trying to figure out how to replicate that, because they have these really old industries. Maybe France is really only focused on luxury goods and cosmetics. Maybe Spain and Italy are focused more on like fashion and tourism. But every country in the world is trying to figure out how do we create that innovation economy that the US has that then generates so much wealth, right? So I found everywhere I went that definitely was like an international passport. But on the other hand, what I found, and the reason I came back to the US, is that the money's really here, right? So London was great to hang out in Buckingham Palace. But if you want to make money, that's in New York and that's in California. In the US is responsible for about 50% of all venture capital globally, right? So when you see that, and that's really concentrated in 2 locations for the most part. Some would say 3 for biotech. That may be like in Boston, but for the most part for software, it's like New York and California, right? So I realized if I wanted to be at the center of the startup ecosystem, I had to come back to the US, and that's why I did that.
I mean, I guess something he didn't mention, by the way, guys, at the Summer Jam, the demo day earlier this summer, is the senator and mayor of New York and Stacey Abrams all spoke at that event. And you were also telling me, I think, that you got the royal family or some member from the royal family to speak at your event in London.
Oh yeah, I got like Will.i.am and Prince Andrew, which we're not supposed to talk about. Prince Charles came, without King Charles. Hung out with William and Kate in Poland. Yeah, so it was kind of like, yeah. I mean, but the thing about it was, entrepreneur. Like, I'm an American guy in Europe in entrepreneurship. Like, that sells. You know what I mean? And I have like these fancy Yale degrees too, so that kind of just gave me like an extra. And I had a company that I sold, so all of that gave me like bona fides that then allowed for me to get access to certain kind of corridors. And then I think like in the U.S. you realize, I mean, it was funny. So Stacey Abrams and I, we were in the same class in law school, and we were like best friends in law school. And when I came back to America, I was like, wow, I didn't realize this Yale degree was actually so powerful. Because remember, I graduated from law school, I clerked in DC, interviewed for the Supreme Court. They were like, come back the next year. I was like, I don't think I want to do this. I was going to go run to Europe for a year instead. And that year became 22 years, right? So the thing is, I never actually benefited from my Yale degree in the US. Every country I went to, it was almost starting from scratch, right? You have to build up your reputation, your brand, your name. And like Barcelona, they're like, who's the Americans? Like, what's, you know? And then you go to Madrid, it's the same thing, you go to London. And then I came back here and I was like, oh wow, there are like a lot of like really famous Yaleys that I can just like reach out to. And it's been like really cool. So that's, I think, like the benefit of it. I think like the number one thing to take away from all of this, and I said this to the law school students, and I think some of the other professors got mad at me. Students asked me like, what would you have done differently in law school? And I was like, I wouldn't have studied so much, right? Because I think like at the end of the day, the benefit of the Yale education is not the kind of like substantive domain expertise, which is gonna change really quickly anyway. In like 5 years, you know, who knows what you're talking about. It's really about like the relationships. In law school, I mean, even though I'm a Democrat, I should have been hanging out with some of the people in the Federalist Society, right? They're the ones that are now all the judges and the whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, that's that, and they're at Yale. They're at Yale and they're right there, they're in your classes. You know, Anne was there, you know, Stacey. So you have loads of like really interesting people that are next to you. Of course you want to do well enough so that you don't make a fool of yourself or embarrass your family, whatever the case may be, but try to find some time to actually get to know the people who are also in your classes, your professors, because these are some of the most interesting people in the world. And now when I look back at my friends, yeah, of course I could reach out to Stacey or some of these other folks because we're friends. It's not because we kind of grew up together, you know what I mean? So I think like, and we did that because we were all concentrated, as Anne said, in a curated petri dish created by Yale, right? So that's kind of, I think, the benefit of the Yale education. Like, enjoy the folks that are next to you, and more importantly, get to know them, even for selfish reasons, because someday a big chunk of them are gonna be really important and really rich. Hopefully that's you, but if it's not, then at least you'll have some really rich and really cool friends.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. It's just like go out and meet people, especially your first couple months at Yale, because it's networking without actually networking. I guess one last question for you. We have 120 Yaleys here, about 100 incoming freshmen who just got to Yale within the last week. Is there any other advice you have for them over the next 4 years?
Yeah, like don't take it too seriously either. I think that would be the other thing. As I went from like, you know, a kind of like gunner, as I call it, to my quarter life crisis, I just realized a lot of the things that I took so seriously in college and law school actually don't matter in the long run. And I can't even remember half of them at this age. I'm not that old, but like old enough that like I forgot half of the stuff that I used to think was so existential. Like the things that people are gonna remember at the end of the day is that I got into Yale, you know, I went to a good graduate school, you know, Yale Law School, and that's kind of it. You know what I mean? And so I'm already kind of, I think when you look at the demographics, because I never did this until like way later, like the percentage of Americans that actually go to college, the percentage of Americans that actually, I think it's like 30, 40%, whatever the number is. So we kind of think about it because, you know, you're like, ever since you're a young age, you're kind of put into this like competitive thing where everyone's going to college and they're all, you know, actually most Americans don't go to college. So you're already kind of in a very privileged group. And then the percentage that will then go to like a Yale or a Harvard or whatever. The other day when the affirmative action decision came out, and you know, the newspaper, the New York Times, was talking about it. They were like, actually, most people who go to college are not trying to get into Harvard or Yale. You know, I mean, so we're talking about a very kind of reduced section of the population to begin with. So you're already like extremely privileged. If you then kind of go to a good grad school, you're going to be even more of a unicorn. So that means that like at the same time that you're competing with old friends and stuff like that, and you're thinking that these small little differences make it a big deal, when you look at like the context of the entire world, like I've been able to do, travel into different countries, those little differences don't make any difference. As Anne said, the people that you're meeting now are going to be some of the smartest, most interesting people that you're going to meet. So I think like my bottom line is like, relax a little bit. Of course you want to distinguish yourself. Part of the reason that you're here is that you've been conditioned to compete and to compete well and to feel that anything less than winning is failure. But in the grand scheme of things, it's actually not that serious.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gary. Huge round of applause.